So tonight we're going to talk about Lydia Zamenhof in Cleveland. The talk will be roughly divided into two parts. First, after just saying a few words about Esperanto itself, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. We'll probably very few of you, but for those who aren't familiar, I'll just say a few words about Esperanto. Then I'm going to talk about the history of Esperanto in Cleveland, a very rich history in this city. Then I'm going to jump back and talk about Lydia Zamenhof, tell you about her life story, her biography, and then I'll explain how these two things, the city of Cleveland and Lydia intersect here in 1938, and then tell you the unfortunate rest of the story, which I'm sure some of you know already. Should we have a speak?
Yes.
What's the opposite? Okay, so what is Esperanto? As you may know, Esperanto is a planned language designed as an auxiliary language to bridge differences between people. It was never intended, as some people claim, to replace an existing language. I see this written, Esperanto was a failure because it never replaced any language. That was never its goal, never has been its goal. It was an auxiliary language, and it was invented by this man, Lydia Zamenhof, by himself, by a single individual. And although there are many artificial languages in the world, Esperanto is by far the most successful artificial language ever created, constructed language ever created. Okay. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about how this language came to Cleveland. So in the past few months, I've done a lot of archival research, and I was able to come up with what I think is the name of the first Cleveland Esperantist. His name was Karl Wintrich. We know that he was interested in Esperanto because in 1892, his name appeared in a volume called the Adresaro. The Adresaro was a volume that was compiled by Zamenhof himself of people who had sent him postcards indicating that they were interested in Esperanto. And his is the first, Dr. Wintrich's name is the first name from not only Cleveland, it's the first name from the state of Ohio altogether. So I was able to find a little about him. He kind of led he led a life that got a lot of press attention. I guess you might say in modern terminology, he was a bit of a badass, like most Esperantists. This story is about how, so he ran a pharmacy. Some of you went to the old arcade, and he had a pharmacy in the old arcade, and that's what his doctor of pharmacy. He was held up. He shot one of the robbers. There's no report about what happened to the robber, just that he shot him. He was involved in a bar fight that was sufficiently raucous that it made the newspapers. His son got divorced in a scandalous divorce, and he, the father, was Dr. Winstrich, was sued by his ex-daughter-in-law for alienation of affection. So he lived a happy life, but unfortunately, other than the fact that he appeared in the Adresaro, I could find nothing about anything he did about Esperanto in Cleveland. So then there's a very long period of time where we don't see any records in Cleveland until around the year 1907. So it turns out that around 1905, 1906, 1907, there's a big upsurge in interest in Esperanto in the United States. So this is from the student newspaper at the Case School of Applied Science. Undoubtedly, you've heard about Case Western Reserve University. In the earlier part of the last century, Case and Western Reserve University were separate schools. So it's the Case Institute of Technology or Institute of Science. It changed its name several times. And then there was Western Reserve University. So I found this one clipping from the student newspaper that in 1907, Dr. Dubois, at the request of students, initiated a class in Esperanto because he thought it was so valuable for scientists to learn Esperanto. Notice that they tell you that if you hear unusual jabbering around the chemistry building, you be careful about consulting what they call the lunacy board, which turns out was a real thing. I checked it out. Lunacy board. The upsurge in Esperanto, there were several factors that seem to have contributed. One was that in 1907, Edmund Duvat, who was a Swiss Esperantist, toured the United States to advocate for the language. And one of the most important events that occurred when he was here was he taught classes at the Chautauqua Institution. So those who aren't from this area will know that Chautauqua Institution is an arts and education institution in Western New York, which is actually fairly close to Cleveland. It's about a 2-hour drive. Back then, you could take a train there, and a lot of people from Northeast Ohio would spend their summers at the Chautauqua Institution. And the newly formed North American Esperanto Association decided to hold its first national convention at the Chautauqua Institution during the Chautauqua season, and Edmund Duvat spoke there. Here's an article from the New York Times about describing the sessions at the Chautauqua Institution. It talks about the Esperantists raised the green flag. According to the Times newspaper record, was the first time the Esperanto flag was ever raised in the United States. I was able to look at the archives for the Chautauqua Daily, which was the newspaper, and not only did they sing Sparrow, the Esperanto anthem, they sang "My Country 'Tis of Thee" in Esperanto. The translation was printed on the front page of the Chautauqua Daily. I wonder what that sounded like. Colonel Harvey, Colonel Harvey was interested. Colonel Harvey was a prominent journalist, and he was editor of a publication called the North American Review, which endorsed Esperanto, and probably was a fairly widely read periodical, and probably contributed to the upsurge of interest in Esperanto at that time. Just to show how important the Chautauqua was, we find this article, many converts to Esperanto secured at Chautauqua. Some of those converts came back here to Cleveland. But in 1908, there was enough discussion about Esperanto that there was actually a proposal for it to be adopted by the Cleveland schools. However, as you see in this newspaper clipping, the administrators at the Cleveland Metropolitan School District frowned upon it and decided they did not want Esperanto taught in their schools, unfortunately. Okay. The first Esperanto class I was able to document occurred in 1909 it was held by the Theosophical Society. Theosophical Society was a significant, it still exists, it was back then a very significant spiritual movement. In fact, I believe the location of this building that it was held in has been torn down, but I believe there was an occult bookstore there where the Theosophists had regular meetings, and after their meetings they held these free Esperanto classes for the general public. Okay. By 1910, which of course is the year that the Universal Kongreso occurs in Washington, D.C., Esperanto is sufficiently well known that the newspapers feel like they could make fun of it. I didn't read this, but I'll read it out loud. It says, "What a dreadful cold Miss Bartley has. That isn't a cold, that's Esperanto." Ha, ha, ha. But at least, it showed that if they make fun of you, it means you exist, right? At the 1910 Universal Kongreso in Washington, D.C., the one that Zamenhof attended, it was a Cleveland Esperantist named Herschel Hall who won the first prize for a short story. So he wrote a story which in English was called "How Bill Became an Esperantist." Not been able to locate the actual story. I tried, and I haven't been able to look at it. He was a columnist for the Saturday Evening Post. He was a novelist. He wrote a novel that was sufficiently well thought of that was actually made into a silent film. But that's not the reason why I included this slide. What's the big deal? It's when I found this 1911 announcement of marriage. It turns out Miss Sybil E. Bailey, Secretary of the Cleveland Esperanto Society, and Mr. Herschel S. Hall, counselor, how many Esperanto groups have counselors now? Counselor of the Ohio Valley Division of the EANA, were married on October 3rd. I thought that was too cute. Not too. I mean, it just shows that you can find love in Esperanto. So by 1925, Cleveland, of course, like many Midwestern cities, very well known for its ethnic diversity. Numerous people coming from all over Europe, particularly Central and Eastern Europe, African Americans moving up from the South, In 1925, according to one source, there were 34 papers published in foreign languages, and there were only 4 or 5 English language newspapers in Cleveland at the time, meaning that the idea of an auxiliary language had some traction here. At Case, go back at Case, I found out that by the mid-1920s, both Case Institute and also both the Case Western Reserve, let me get this right, both Case Tech and Western Reserve universities both had 4-credit Esperanto courses taught at their schools. And both, I actually had the arguments pull up the course catalogs, and you could get credit for taking these classes. How going to look back there? 1925 was an important year for Cleveland Esperanto. That was when the 18th National Esperanto Congress occurred in Cleveland. Here is a photograph of the Congress attendees. Ties all through. Don't you feel wonderful? I hope it wasn't as hot. I know some of you are planning to go on the Good Time 3 here. That means there were 2 B's. Good Times. They didn't call it the Good Time 1 because they didn't know there was going to be a second one. But as you can see from this note from the Esperanto Bulletin, that the Esperanto convention went on a tour almost 101 years ago on the Good Times. And it rained. I hope it doesn't rain on here.
I think it's supposed to.
Fenn College, by 1932, Fenn College was an engineering school. You might notice there's a building here on campus called Fenn Tower. Fenn Engineering School was the nucleus for what eventually became Cleveland State University. The man who was the head of the foreign language department, a man named Franz Tomich, sometimes called Frank Tomich, he was the head of the foreign language department. He was an Esperantist, and he taught Esperanto at Fenn College. Okay. So there's a large group of Esperantists in Cleveland, a lot of interest in Esperanto in Cleveland. Now we're going to go back and talk a little bit about Lydia Zamenhof and how she comes to her story. So Lydia Zamenhof was the youngest child of Ludwig and Clara Zamenhof, and she was born in 1904. At first, the story goes, she was very resistant to learning this new language. She did not want to learn Esperanto, despite the pressure she got from her parents. However, when the Congress in Bern, Switzerland was going to occur in 1913, her parents said, "You can't come unless you learn Esperanto." And that appeared to be sufficient motivation for her. So she dove into the language in 6 weeks. Her parents, and who would be better judges, right? Decided that she was sufficiently fluent in Esperanto that she was allowed to attend the Congress. Okay, her degree was in law, so she trained in law, but she never practiced as an attorney. As her cousin Stefan Zamenhof said, she believes she has a mission in life from her father to propagate Esperanto. So her main occupation became teaching Esperanto. This is a photograph of her. Teaching Esperanto. She traveled extensively around Europe, conducting classes in many European countries in Esperanto, and that was her primary occupation. However, something occurred at the Universal Kongreso of Geneva in 1925. She met a woman named Martha Root. Martha Root is also an Ohioan. She was born in Richmond, Ohio, and she attended Oberlin College. It's not too far from here. What's significant about Martha Root was that she was a convert to the Baha'i religion. So for those who don't know, Baha'ism is a religion that was founded in what was then called Persia, which is now Iran. It was a monotheistic, it still exists. It's a universalist, monotheistic religion that advocates for world peace. And a central belief of some of the founders of Baha'ism was the idea that there should be an auxiliary language, and for that reason, many Esperantists, many Baha'is became Esperantists, and oftentimes the Baha'is would be active in the Esperanto movement. So she converted to the Baha'i faith in 1909, and in the 1925 Congress, she organized a Baha'i session which Lydia came to. So Lydia was interested in it. She wasn't sure if it was for her or not, but she felt that there was a certain rapport between the ideas of Baha'is and the ideas in Esperanto. However, a year later, in 1926, when there was a dedication of a monument to Lydia Zamenhof. Zamenhof died in 1917. They built a monument for him at the cemetery, which was unveiled in 1926. So Esperantists came from all over the world. Martha came to Warsaw, and she stayed in the Zamenhof house. And she exchanged a language teacher. She taught Lydia to speak English, while Lydia tutored her in Esperanto. And probably because of that close personal bond between the two of them, continued to correspond for many years. Lydia finally converted to the Baha'i faith, which she was very active in addition to her Esperanto. Why don't you let me this pamphlet to show you tonight? This is a pamphlet she wrote in Esperanto. He's called Religio de Paz, the religion of peace. I do want to make one thing clear about her conversion to Baha'ism, that she was very careful. So this is a time of rising anti-Semitism in Europe and in Poland. So even prior to the Nazi invasion of Poland, anti-Semitism was on the rise in Poland. And Lydia Zamenhof made a very conscious decision not to renounce her Jewish ethnic identity. She said, spiritually, I'm a Baha'i, but ethnically identified with the Jewish people because she felt it was very important not to give any sanction to anti-Semitism or to suggest that her conversion was in any way a renunciation of her connection to Judaism. Okay. At the Baha'i Congress in 1928, Lydia attends that. You can see her point. This is Lydia sitting in the front row. Not looking very happy. So I find this true. It's like there's a certain period of time where everybody kind of looks dour in photographs. At some point, we all like to say cheese, but before a certain age, everybody looks kind of serious in photographs. Okay. So Lydia comes to the United States. Why does she come to the United States? Mostly because of an invitation from the Baha'i National Assembly in the United States. And also, many other Esperantists were encouraged her to come. And so finally, she took the big trip. This is an actual photograph of the ship that she traveled on, taken actually in the year when she came to the United States. She arrived in New York on September 29th, and she received quite a bit of newspaper coverage, for instance. I like this daughter of inventor invades U.S. A lot of the coverage is kind of human interest, poking a little fun at Esperanto, but it was getting coverage, which was good. Wish we could get more coverage now. Here, for instance, there was a lot of interest in the Jewish press and Jewish wire services. So here you have the high priestess of Esperanto. If you actually, I'm not going to read this, but there's a whole bunch of facts which are totally incorrect in here. But the fact is, she received a lot of. I see 10,000 already. So she traveled around extensively. Well, she was in the United States. She stayed in New York. She visited Philadelphia. She went to Maine. She spent a little bit of time in Detroit. So here's coverage from the Detroit papers. Obviously, you can't read this. This kind of slide that she told never to put up, which is too crowded. But this is just showing you all the different ethnic newspapers in Detroit that covered her visit. Of special interest to me, when she was in Detroit, she spoke to the Vegetarian Society of Michigan. And I would love, I've written to archivists there and to the current vegetarian group there, and no one knows anything about it. She gave a speech called Vegetarianism and World Understanding. I know from reading a lot of biographical material about her, she was not in fact a vegetarian, so I don't know what she actually said. But in any event, she did speak to that. Another place she spent time in was Lima, Ohio. And the reason she spent time in Lima, Ohio was because there was a large group of Baha'is in Lima. And they invited her down. She taught us local classes there. But it was because of Lima, because of traveling to places like Detroit, that she ended up spending so much time in Cleveland. Cleveland was centrally located on the railroad lines, which was the main way of getting to these places at that time. Okay, and the other reason why she was attracted to Cleveland was there was a large, as I've said before, a large Esperanto movement here. This is a very poor photograph, the best I could get, of the 1938 Esperanto Club of Cleveland, but this picture understates the number of Esperantists there were in the city. For amongst other things, there were so many Esperanto clubs, there were suburban Esperanto clubs. So I know that Cleveland Heights had an Esperanto club, East Cleveland had an Esperanto club, as you'll see, a high school had an Esperanto club. And so because Lydia was here, because the National Congress was here, reverse that, because Lydia was here, because Cleveland was the center for Esperanto, in that year, 1938, the Esperanto Congress is held here in Cleveland. The Cleveland Congress of Beckons. This says some of the things they did here. They actually went to the radio station WTAM, which is a current channel station that still exists, but I don't recommend listening to it. It's all talk radio, sports and talk radio. Okay. Not my cup of tea, but back then they actually had regular Esperanto broadcasts on WTAM. And you'll see they mention that Lydia's teaching classes here. Okay. This is an interesting article from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. These two young women were members of the Shaker Heights High School Esperanto Club. I went and found the yearbooks for 1938, and of course there was a photograph of the Esperanto Club at Shaker Heights High School. So these young people interested in this. I tried to find out what happened to some of them. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to locate anybody still around. However, I did find somebody at the Esperanto Congress that occurred here. There was a boy by the name of Samuel Martin, who was 13 years old, son of a petroleum engineer from Kansas, and he came and spoke in Esperanto, and the Esperantists were so impressed, they took up a collection to allow him to go and take a special class with Lydia Zamenhof. Now, I wonder, and they like Samuel Martin, I'm never going to find what happened. If you're curious, what happened to this guy? I'm never going to find him. My first Google search turns out he has a Wikipedia page.
No way.
He became a well-thought-of linguist. He became an expert on Asian languages and the author of several books. So Esperanto is the good start of a career. Yes. Here is a photograph of the Esperanto Congress. Once again, everybody wearing suits and ties. They're standing on the top of the Allerton Hotel, which is on 13th Street. It's no longer a hotel. It's actually public housing now, but the building is still standing there. And you see in the first row where the X is, the white hat, that's Lydia Zamenhof in the center of it all. Okay. Another photograph from the Congress. I'm not sure who these other people are, but you can see Lydia with the hat and the glasses and the sign for Cleveland. Okay. Another event that occurred, so if you look across Euclid Avenue, you'll see Trinity Cathedral. And Sunday morning, the last day of the convention, Lydia gave a talk, presumably in Esperanto, Esperanto in service of religion. Once again, I haven't been able to locate any text or any records of what she actually said, but I think it would be very interesting to find out. So Lydia was a big deal in the city. But Cleveland is not isolated and was not isolated from the rest of the world. And there were dangerous trends going on in Europe. When I think about this period of time, I'm always reminded of the line Poetry by Alden Tyke, who was writing specifically about this time, where he says, in the nightmare of the darks, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its haze. And that's a pretty good description of what's going on. Esperanto claimed political neutrality. It seems like such a well-intentioned project. Why would anybody object to it? But it drew hostility, especially from nationalists. Okay? Specifically, Esperanto is mentioned specifically in Mein Kampf by Hitler as being a plot by the Jews to dominate us all the more easily. Similarly, Hitler's Lieutenant Himmler I said the artificial language Esperanto is part of Esperantism, a tool of the Jews. Okay. The Nazis would go on then to ban Esperanto, and this is an article in the New York Times, because of its Jewish origins, because of its aspirations towards internationalism. Esperanto was banned in Nazi Germany. Lydia is aware of these developments. She writes, "We live in a dubious era when fires are fed by books." But these events were going to catch up with her. So Lydia was advised when she came to the United States, she was advised by family, friends, and Esperantists in Europe not to return to Europe. So she tried to stay in the United States, but unfortunately she didn't succeed. Now the exact story of all the appeals and the whole process is very complex and more than I'm going to go into today. If you want to know a blow-by-blow description, this excellent biography of Lydia by Wendy Heller describes everything that happened. When you read it, it certainly becomes clear that both Lydia and the Esperantists and the Baha'is made some mistakes in terms of how they approached the immigration process. But if you were to think that's why she had to leave the country, you would be mistaken. It was very clear in America at that time that if you were valued, that you could stay. If you were a scientist, if you were an Albert Einstein, if you were an Enrico Fermi, there was room in the United States for us. If you were valuable for the entertainment industry, if you were Marlene Dietrich, if you were Fritz Lang, there was room in the United States. But still, there were strong nativist tendencies in America, and many, many people who sought refuge in the United States were not able to get it. Lydia amongst them, and on November 30th, 1938, she returned to Poland. Within a year of that, just to emphasize this point, on May 1939, the U.S. turned away the ocean liner St. Louis. Most of the passengers on the ship, almost 1,000 people, were Jewish refugees. They were unable to disembark in the United States or any place else they tried in this hemisphere. They were forced to return to Europe, and we know that at least 254 of the passengers on the ship were killed in the Holocaust. Okay. After Lydia returns to Poland, Poland is invaded by Germany, and the Holocaust begins in earnest. So Americans are trying, don't try to read this once again, terrible slide. Let me teach you about PowerPoint. They never have a slide like this, so don't read this. But I just want to show you that the headline, Efforts on Behalf of Lydia Zamenhof. So notice the year is 1940. So this is before the United States is actually at war with Germany. This is before Pearl Harbor. The United States has not declared war on Germany yet, or Japan. And there's efforts being made to try to find out what happened to Lydia, what happened to Lydia. And there's some initial contact to get some initial information, but basically crickets. Things go silent. They don't know what's going on. They even organized a committee. It was a Cleveland Esperantist named Lee Stern, and he organized a committee on behalf of Lydia, trying to find out information about Lydia, trying hopefully to get her out of Poland, but they failed. They're not able to. Once the war begins, then contact becomes virtually possible, difficult to begin with. And what we know is that Lydia was confined to the Warsaw Ghetto. Later, she's rounded up and taken to the death camp in Treblinka, where she was murdered by the Nazis. So, what does this mean for us today? Well, one more thing I should add before I get to that is that so the American Esperantists don't learn that Lydia died until 1946. So 4 years after her death, you finally see articles appearing that they determined that Lydia did not survive. And there started to be memorial services. So in 1946, you see memorial services held across the country, both by Esperanto groups and by Baha'i groups in her honor. Okay, so Lydia said, we live in, talked about living in dubious times. I don't think it takes much imagination to realize that we again live in a dubious era, in a dubious time. And perhaps in a time like this is a time when Esperanto still has a very important message to give the world, because Esperanto is that hope. Is that hope that it's possible for us to understand each other and recognize our humanness across cultural, linguistic, ethnic, national barriers, and that hope is still valuable, and that's why Esperanto remains a valuable contribution to the world today. Let's end then with some words from Lydia herself. Let us learn the lessons of the days past, and let us swear those days shall never return. With that, I'm open to your questions. Yes.
Approximately how many hours did you spend researching for this?
I'm retired. I get to do what I want. I spent a lot of time, but some of it was just, I read this book already, and I could go around and I kind of enjoy rooting around in archives, so it was a pleasure to do it. And it's been a while. Yes.
So after Lydia was denied permission to remain in the U.S., did she consider either just remaining in the U.S. without permission or going to Canada instead?
Well, interesting. So she didn't want to break the law. She received several offers of marriage as a way to get in, and she didn't feel that was right, so she didn't do that. The Canadian Esperantists, they had asked the Canadian Esperantists to issue an invitation to her, which would have allowed her to go to Canada, but the Canadian Esperantists decided not to do that. I'm totally unclear why. I have no, it's just in the Heller book, they say that they failed to do so, and therefore that was never an option for her. And she had strong feelings that she had to obey what the law said. Yes?
I read that book
Oh, it's a great book.
many years ago, and I had thought that she had made a conscious decision to return to Europe. And I don't know whether that was publicized elsewhere or...
So, no, it's a little bit, what happened was she got so frustrated, and she was convinced that there was no more appeal. She reached a point where she thinks it's futile to appeal anymore, and she just goes back. So that, eventually, she just got demoralized.
But she actually would have preferred to stay, which is...
She would have preferred to stay, yeah. She had strong reasons to stay, but she was demoralized. And, and I think it's also true that some people just didn't imagine how bad things had gotten and were going to get in Europe too. I think that's also part of it. Yes?
So, this isn't specifically about Lydia, but I noticed in the schedules for one of the congresses that you showed, they had day 1 and day 2 in the morning of business sessions. Do we know what those business sessions were, or they were about? Or
I don't know. That's an
Dude,
interesting question.
At that time, the only time, so the Board of Esperanto meets monthly by this magical internet now, but cast yourself backwards. The only time that people came together to do any business of the association was during this meeting. This meeting's in the bylaws for that reason. So that's what they were talking about. It was whatever business they were conducting on part of it.
That's in the past 10 years of that meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. So whatever business of the association there was at the time, they only held it once a year.
How high should dues be? How often should the newsletter be sent out? Those decisions are still being made.
Electing the board.
Who should work for us?
Yep.
Should we work with one?
Yes.
Yeah, about 36 years ago, I gave a talk about Esperanto to a Rotary Club northeast of Columbus.
Oh, cool.
And they asked if I had any honorarium, and I said, soccer. But what they did not tell me ahead of time. They had some woman here in the Columbus area who just amassed all kinds of information about Esperanto and Lydia. And they had these newspaper articles. They may have given me some, and some went all my Esperantaggio, which is not a small amount. I may have them, but it was really impressive. It was just just an amazingly wonderful surprise.
Oh, that's interesting, that's interesting. There was actually a small town south of Columbus, which at one time tried to become an Esperanto center. It's very long, involves,
I think this is northeast of Columbus.
Okay.
I think it started with a W, but, this is really nice.
It's southwest of Columbus. It's called Lithopolis. I was actually about to ask you.
Oh, yes, so I've been there. Have you been there?
I've been there, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, so it was the Wagner,
Wagner.
Wagnall, yes, Funky Wagnall did very fortunate, right, and they were gonna establish a school there. They do have an archive of Esperanto material, mostly concerning what they did there.
Yeah. Have you seen communication with Maple Wagnall's pop up in your archiving of the Cleveland Esperanto?
Not in Cleveland, no, I have not seen it. I mean, her name shows up quite a bit in the newspapers generally,
Gotcha.
but nothing in relation to Cleveland.
I have two. One is, you mentioned Lima, Ohio, and when I was doing a lot of research on Esperanto in the U.S. in the 30s and 40s, I saw that pop up a lot, and they actually had a congress in Lima, Ohio as well. And at the time I was like, where is Lima, Ohio? And why would they do this Esperanto congress there? And it's like 10,000 people, right? It's a very small
town.
Very small town. So it's, I guess it must have been because of the Baha'is.
It was because of the Baha'i presence, yeah.
Right.
And that seems to be an interesting story. I did talk to somebody from the Historical Society in Lima, and they were aware that there had been a Baha'i population there, but apparently they're not there anymore. And I did see one reference saying that they actually were actually somewhat persecuted in Lima, that some of the churches had condemned, made it unpleasant for this new sect. But it seems like it would be a real interesting story to investigate more.
And then my second question is, my understanding was that Lydia also explored going to Palestine to be closer to the center of the Baha'i.
I don't know if she did it this time, but she had before, right? She had asked for permission. She actually did go to Palestine for a while,
Okay.
9 years. So she did spend some time there.
Yeah.
She had to get permission from the leader. So essentially the center of Baha'ism moved to Palestine, to what was then Palestine, under a recent persecution in Persia.
And didn't he tell her to go to Poland in the end?
Yes, he did tell her to go to Poland, yes. So yes, she oftentimes, when there's a lot of correspondence between her and the leader of the Baha'is, and where she asked for his advice or asked for his permission. Sometimes she would propose something and he would go along with it. So, yes?
What happened to the Cleveland Esperanto?
Well, I think it's what happened to the whole Esperanto movement. It was interesting. One slide I didn't include was from newspaperarchives.com. I got a chart of newspaper coverage of Esperanto in America. And it was really interesting because there's a real increase, like in starting around 1907, 1908. It goes way up, it starts to fall, it goes up again a little bit in the 1930s, and then it really declines substantially. I can't tell you what happened to specific individuals. Most of them aren't alive anymore to tell me what happened, but I think Esperanto went into a decline. In America, I think there are a couple factors that affected. One is, remember that the movement had started in Central Europe, and World War II essentially cleaned out a lot of that leadership in Central Europe. I was listening to a lecture about the history of Esperanto it was a Czech lecture, so it was Czechoslovakia technically back then. And they were just talking about different Esperantos in Czechoslovakia, and you would look at them, have the birth year, and then it would be 1942, 1943, 1942, 1943, and you realized what that meant was that these were people who all died in the Holocaust. So that happened. I think in the United States we had particular problems because Americans feel like you only need to learn one language, right? And I think there's just a prejudice against language learning in the United States because we have these big oceans. We think in Hollywood, and we think English is so great. And then I think McCarthy era really hurt Esperanto. Here was a period of nationalism, nativism, And here were these people talking this funny language, and they wanted to talk to people behind the Iron Curtain and stuff. And I think that really hurt the Esperanto movement in America, as it hurt many social movements in this country. Yes.
Another question or comment. We were in the Esperanto Museum in Vienna last year, and there was one thing there where they talked about at one time, prior to Stalin turning against Esperanto, there were 13,000 Esperantists in Russia.
Yeah.
That were systematically persecuted.
Yeah, no, it was very active and still Stalin. And of course, one of the things that Stalin did was he reinvigorated nationalism in the Soviet Union. So there was a strong emphasis on Mother Russia and so forth again, which had been rejected by the earlier Bolsheviks. And therefore, at that point, Esperanto with the nationalism became suspect. Though, of course, it does revive under Khrushchev.
I know research can be full of delightful surprises as well as frustrating, disappointing dead ends. Did you have a particular discovery that you'd say was the highlight of who knew I'd be the one to piece this and this together? Or was there a particular dead end that you're like, I can't believe I can't find this photo that I know exists? What would be?
I have lots of dead ends. I mean, there's so many people who sounded like they were interested and couldn't find out anything more than just that they were involved with Esperanto or something like that. So there were, I would love to know more about the Theosophists, their connection to Esperanto here. And I talked to the Theosophical Society. They have a lodge over in Parma, over the other side of the river. And they had never heard of Esperanto. They didn't have records that went back that far. So it was a complete dead end. I could just go on and on. In terms of, everything's in there. I love the story about Herschel Hall and Mary with Esperanto, but there's all, Samuel Martin becoming, as a 13-year-old Esperantist going on to become a famous linguist. There's all kinds of wonderful stories like that. Yeah, yes.
Related to the theme from our course earlier this week, did Lydia ever get involved with homaranismo, which is sort of similar to Baha'i?
No, she was, I think she saw in Baha'i the fulfillment of the idea of her father.
Sure.
So and you can see that there's a certain similarity. And it's not an identical match, but there is a certain, it's kind of universalism, the idea that there's some truth in all religions, something that Baha'is embrace. So you can see that was influenced, but it was definitely she considered herself a Baha'i. Yes?
In Lydia's surviving papers, did she write any opinions she had about Cleveland or the city? Like she liked Cleveland?
I thought she said Cleveland rocks.
There is a wonderful letter she wrote back where she's trying to describe what America is like to Europeans. And she says that you can walk and get ice cream every day. And she's amazed by it. She will get ice cream every day. And she says, and they sell them in the ice cream in the pharmacies. And she just thought this was like the strangest, most wonderful thing. So you do find letters like that, but I didn't find anything that the Cleveland Chamber of Commerce could use. Is that it? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Patrons, thank you so much for your support in making these videos and for helping people explore Esperanto.